उसका ड्यू मिला है? अगर नहीं मिला तो क्यों नहीं मिला है? और मिलना है, मिलना चाहिए तो कैसे मिलना चाहिए? ऐसे कई सारे सवाल हैं, खास करके वो लोग जो कॉमिक्स से जुड़े हुए हैं, चाहे उसको बनाने के ख्याल से। अनीता जी हमारे बीच आ गई हैं, बहुत-बहुत स्वागत है। हमारा ये जो सेशन है वो बहुत ही इस तरह के क्रिएटिव राइटर से जुड़ा हुआ है जो कॉमिक्स में देखिए क्या होता है, चित्रों से आप बात करते हैं। आपके सामने एक इमेज खड़ी हो जाती है, आपके सामने एक कैरेक्टर विद अ फेस खड़ा हो जाता है, तो आप उसको किस तरह से देखते हैं और उसके साथ जो उसकी बारीकियां हैं उसको कैसे देखा जाना चाहिए, दोनों चीजें होनी चाहिए। इट इज नॉट दैट सिंपल जितना सिंपल वो लग रहा है, आप उसको क्या उस तरह से ले भी रहे हैं। तो इन सभी बातों पर बात करने के लिए पहले तो मैं इस सेशन को जो चेयर कर रही है हमारे बीच में, अमृता पाटिल जी को मैं स्टेज पर बुलाना चाहूंगी और हम सभी तालियों से स्वागत करें, क्योंकि ये बहुत ही गंभीर विषय है। और मैं बताना चाहूंगी कि अमृता पाटिल एक लेखिका और चित्रकार हैं और अपनी पहली महिला ग्राफिक्स उपन्यासकार भी हैं। पहली महिला ग्राफिक्स उपन्यासकार। आप ग्राफिक उपन्यासकारी, महाभारत के 2 पर्व, आदि पर्व, टर्निंग ऑफ द ओशन एंड सॉप्टिक, ब्लड एंड फ्लावर्स, ब्लड ब्लड एंड फ्लावर्स और आरण्यक जो मनोविज्ञान, पारिस्थितिकीवाद और वैदिक दर्शन की लेखिका हैं। 2017 में पाटिल जी को कला और साहित्य में सीमाओं का अतिक्रमण करने वाला असाधारण कार्य हेतु भारत के राष्ट्रपति से नारी शक्ति पुरस्कार प्राप्त हुआ है। जो आप वैश्विक दर्शकों के लिए नॉन फिक्शन डिजिटल कॉमिक्स करती हैं, उस पर कॉमिक्स की एक सह संस्थापकों में से आप एक हैं। आपका इस मंच पर बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। मित्रों, हमारे बीच हैं अनिरुद्ध सेन गुप्ता जी, आपका भी इस मंच पर बहुत स्वागत है। आप सभी तालियों से स्वागत करें, क्योंकि ये बहुत ही क्रिएटिव राइटर्स हैं, वेरी डिफरेंट फ्रॉम नॉर्मल राइटर्स जिनको हम कहते हैं। नॉर्मल तो राइटर्स होते नहीं है, लेकिन उससे भी कहीं हटकर स्पेशल होते हैं ये बहुत ही। अनिरुद्ध सेन गुप्ता प्रतिष्ठित पत्रकार, लेखक, संपादक और डिजाइनर हैं। आपने हमारी विषाक्त दुनिया नाम से एक ग्राफिक गाइड बुक लिखी है जो पर्यावरणीय मुद्दों पर आधारित है और जिसे प्रिया कुरियन ने चित्रित किया है। आपने प्रिया के साथ कई अन्य चित्रकथाओं पर भी काम किया है, जिसमें सेकंड नेचर, ब्रेनवेव पत्रिका में मासिक 2 पृष्ठों के स्तंभ, डीओजीएस एन एंथोलॉजी की एक कहानी और विभिन्न पत्रिकाओं में कई चित्रकथाएं शामिल हैं। आपने भारतीय चित्रकथाओं को समर्पित पत्रिका मार्ग के एक विशेष अंक का अतिथि संपादन किया है और वर्तमान में भारत की पहली नियमित चित्रकथा पत्रिका कॉमिक सेंस के परामर्श संपादक के रूप में आप कार्यरत हैं। आपका इस मंच पर बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। हमारे बीच हैं भरत वेंकटेश मूर्ति। भरत वेंकटेश मूर्ति जी, या प्लीज कम ऑन द स्टेज। आप कॉमिक्स लिखते और चित्र बनाते हैं। द वैनिश्ड पाथ, अ ग्राफिक टेबलॉग आपकी पहली कॉमिक पुस्तक है। आप कॉमिक्स इंडिया लेबल्स के अंतर्गत भारत में कॉमिक्स का संपादन और प्रकाशन करते हैं और आपने वृत्त चित्र और एनिमेटेड सीक्वेंसेस बनाए हैं। 2017 में आपने एनडी कॉमिक्स फेस्ट की सह स्थापना की, जो स्व प्रकाशित कॉमिक्स का वार्षिकोत्सव है। फिल्म और टेलीविजन संस्थान पुणे और सृष्टि मणिपाल संस्थान बेंगलुरु में 1 दशक से अधिक के शिक्षण अनुभव के साथ आपने भारत में कॉमिक्स और ग्राफिक साहित्य में पहला मास्टर्स कोर्स विकसित किया है। वर्तमान में आप गांधी की जीवनी पर एक कॉमिक पुस्तक पर काम कर रहे हैं। आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। हर्ष मोहन चट्टराज जी हमारे बीच हैं, उनका भी बहुत स्वागत है। आप एक ग्राफिक उपन्यासकार और चित्रकार हैं। आपने पेंगुइन आदि प्रकाशकों के लिए पुस्तकों पर 2 दशकों तक काम किया। आपकी हाल ही में आई कुछ किताबों में विमेन इन पावर, चक्कर एंड जर्नी इनटू द फर्नेस ऑफ हिस्ट्री, फूड एंड फार्मिंग आदि शामिल हैं। आप मैड बोंगस बोंगस नामक कॉमिक रचनाकारों की एक टीम का भी हिस्सा हैं तथा एवीजीसी एक्सआर बंगाल टीम के सदस्य भी हैं। आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। एकरूप संधू जी हमारे बीच हैं। या आपका भी इस मंच पर बहुत स्वागत है। आप एक कलाकार, चित्रकार और कहानीकार हैं। आपकी रचनाओं को 4 ग्राफिक्स कहानी संकलनों में शामिल किया गया है। भगत सिंह के जीवन पर आपका पहला ग्राफिक्स उपन्यास 2022 में प्रकाशित हुआ। आप वर्तमान में जिंदल विश्वविद्यालय के कला और वास्तुकला विद्यालय की संकाय सदस्य हैं। आप वहाँ एनिमेशन और चरित्र डिजाइनिंग पढ़ाती हैं। आपका बहुत-बहुत स्वागत है। हमारे बीच राजकुमारी जी मैं देख रही थी अभी आपको। जी। आप एक कलाकार, कवियत्री और डिजाइनर हैं। आपकी पहली किताब बिक्सु एक ग्राफिक्स उपन्यास है जिसे मधुबनी कला से चित्रित किया गया है। ओह! ग्रेट। जो 2018 में प्रकाशित हुई और आलोचकों के साथ-साथ बच्चों द्वारा भी अच्छी प्रतिक्रिया इसे मिली है। 2020 में उपन्यास को पराग सम्मान सूची में शामिल किया गया था। इसके अतिरिक्त आपने कई प्रकाशनों में चित्रकार के रूप में खास योगदान दिया है। आपका बहुत-बहुत सोवियो मास्क्स पर करेन हास, इफ आई एम रॉन्ग प्लीज मेरे को करेक्ट कर दीजिए। अच्छा, सोवियो मेस्करेनहास आप हैं हमारे बीच में। आप प्लीज कम ऑन द स्टेज। आप अमर चित्र कथा और टिंकल कॉमिक्स के समूह कला निदेशक हैं, जो कलाकारों और डिजाइनरों के साथ एक सक्रिय समूह के संरक्षक हैं, जो दुनिया भर में कॉमिक्स के माध्यम से कहानी कहने की विरासत को आगे बढ़ाते हैं। आपने 90 के दशक की शुरुआत में कला और कॉमिक्स के प्रति अपनी रुचि पाई। टिंकल कॉमिक्स से सुपंडी और शिकारी शंभू जैसे प्रिय पात्रों का निर्माण किया और अमर चित्रकथा की दुनिया में किंवदंतियों और कथाओं को जीवित किया। आप एक टीडीएस वक्ता भी हैं, जो दृश्य शिक्षा के लिए वकालत करते हैं और भारत के स्कूलों और कॉलेजों में कॉमिक्स कार्यशालाएं आयोजित करते हैं। आप द पब्लिशिंग नेक्स्ट अवार्ड 24 ईपीएस अवार्ड जैसे विभिन्न पुरस्कारों के जूरी में रह चुके हैं। आपका इस मंच पर बहुत-बहुत स्वागत है। हमारे बीच हैं सुमित कुमार जी। आपका इस मंच पर स्वागत है। आप एक कार्टूनिस्ट और बकरमैक्स स्टूडियो के संस्थापक हैं। आपका पहला ग्राफिक्स उपन्यास द इंच यू कांट स्क्रैच को बहुत सराहना मिली और आपके ऐतिहासिक ग्राफिक्स उपन्यास आमार बारी तोमार बारी नक्सलबारी मामरबारी, तोमरबारी, नक्सलबारी और कश्मीर की कहानी को मुख्य धारा में सफलता प्राप्त हुई। आपने कहानियां भी लिखी हैं और कॉमिक कॉन इंडिया को शुरू करने में मदद की है। वर्तमान में आप किक स्टार्टर्स द्वारा वित्त पोषित वयस्क एनिमेटेड सीरीज आपकी पूजिता का निर्माण कर रहे हैं। आपका मंच पर बहुत स्वागत है। विकास सिंह जी हमारे बीच हैं और आपको भी इस मंच पर बुला करके इस पैनल को पूरा करना चाहती हूँ। विकास सिंह ब्रांड और मार्केटिंग प्रोफेशनल हैं। आपको डाबर च्यवनप्राश, डिटॉल, स्टार न्यूज, दैनिक भास्कर और साक्षी जैसे बड़े ब्रांड बनाने और उन्हें संवारने में 25 से अधिक वर्षों का अनुभव है। आप एक टीडीएक्स और कॉमिक्स ऑन स्पीकर हैं। आप कॉमिक्स के शौकीन संग्रहकर्ता हैं। आपके पास 126 भाषाओं में टिंटिन कॉमिक्स के सबसे बड़े संग्रह का विश्व रिकॉर्ड है। आप कॉमिक्स फॉर चेंज पहल से जुड़े हुए हैं, जिसे कई राष्ट्रीय और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय पुरस्कार प्राप्त हैं। इस पहल का उद्देश्य सामाजिक परिवर्तन लाने के लिए कॉमिक्स की क्षमता का उपयोग करना है। आपका इस मंच पर बहुत-बहुत स्वागत है। दोस्तों, ये मंच आप देख रहे हैं और समझ सकते हैं मंच को देख करके ही कि कॉमिक्स को पढ़ना जितना आराम, आसान और आनंददायक है, कॉमिक्स को तैयार करना और उसके गहरे में जाना उससे कहीं अलग बात है। अब इसकी क्या बारीकियां हैं, इसके क्या डिटेल्स हैं, उसके लिए मैं ये मंच सौंप रही हूँ हमारी आज के चेयरपर्सन को एंड शी विल टेक द वे शी वांट्स टू।
थैंक यू ऑल फॉर बीइंग हियर। मैं बीच-बीच में हिंदी में बात करूँगी, लेकिन ज़्यादातर प्रेज़ेंटेशन इंग्लिश में रहेगा। ओके? तो एक तो रुकने के लिए थैंक यू वेरी मच। इट्स लवली टू हैव यू हियर। जो लोग एकदम पीछे बैठे हैं, अगर आप आगे आना चाहो तो आइडिया अच्छी होगी। दिस इज़ गोइंग टू बी द मोस्ट एक्साइटिंग पैनल टुडे इन दिस पर्टिकुलर वेन्यू एंड यू मे वांट टू बी क्लोज़र इन ऑर्डर टू जस्ट सी द थिंग्स बेटर। सो दैट्स एन ऑप्शन दैट यू हैव। तो मुझे हमारे जब इस सेशन के बारे में आई वाज गिवन द इंफॉर्मेशन, इट वाज कॉल्ड आर कॉमिक्स लिटरेचर. As you see here, I have written comics as literature because once you have the Sahitya Academy hosting you as part of their programming, then clearly that whether it is literature or not has been sorted out. So now we can go on to discuss what kind of literature, what is going on, things like that. A little word about why the people that have been chosen have been chosen. Now, the easiest thing for me to do as a person who also works with text and image is to gather a bunch of friends so we could all be in Delhi together. But what I have done instead is gotten people together who are as different as possible. They're so different that many of them probably absolutely will not read each other's work. We have got different politics. We come from different parts of the country. There is really a tremendous diversity here, and I feel very happy and chuffed that we could get people together of that sort. And each person has been chosen to be here for a particular role that I see that they play in the Indian comics scene. So the first I'm going to start off with is Savio. Now, luckily the introductions are done, so we can just leap in. Now, he has got the unique distinction of having worked with Amar Chitrakatha for 31 odd years, which means that he's gone from being a young artist working in the brand that basically is what comes to mind to people when they think about Indian comics, whether in India or abroad. Right? So that's a pretty amazing sort of a place to be and hard place to be. This is a recent group photo featuring all of us with Savio there, also Julia Trio, who is from the French Institute. She's also there in the group, and we are going to be hosting a comics exhibition of Indian tradition soon. So hovering there above all of us is the omnipresent Uncle Pai or Anant Pai. And what is very interesting for me is this person has been so iconic and he's a product of his context and time, right? But he's legendary also. So what it is like for somebody to have worked in the shadow of him and other kind of iconic people is something that we'd like to speak about. I'm just going to show you a couple of images. We heard that Savio is responsible for having created characters like Shikari Shambhu, like Supandi. And within this panel, there are people that have also done takes which are satires on Supandi. So it's kind of lovely that that is the case, right? So those who are new to the comics medium, please see the inking process and the final art left and right. There is more work over here. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, Savio, and we can then cue to some slides that you may want to ask, talk about. Now, do you have any anecdotes about what it was like for you to have joined into what was an institution when you went there to begin with, 31 years ago, Amar Chitrakatha, and what it was like? Is there now? This is a very large panel. I could actually have talked to any one of you for 60 minutes and a half flat, but we are going to have to keep the answers concise. So don't think I'm bullying you if I'm moving questions ahead. It's just because I want everybody to get a chance. Okay? Go ahead, please.
So, hello. My journey started when I was around 22, 23. And I'm not a trained artist. I've not been to an art school, but I'm a trained advertising person. I worked in advertising as a copywriter, and drawing was my hobby. So one fine day, when I saw an ad in the newspaper which said that Tinkle needed a comic book artist, that's when I actually approached Uncle Pai and I showed him some of my cartoons. And he loved them so much. This was in 92. And that began my journey as a cartoonist for Tinkle. I freelanced with Tinkle for 3 years as a cartoonist. And of course, I worked full time as a copywriter. Uh, Around 94, when I went to wish Uncle Pai Happy New Year, it was 31st of December. And he asked me, "What are you doing nowadays?" I said, "I'm working as a full time copywriter and a part time cartoonist." So he said, "What do you like best?" And I said, "I like to draw." Then he said, "I'll give you a New Year's gift." So my job is actually a New Year's gift for me. So I guess that's the day I actually stopped working because then I was passionately doing what I really love to do. That's been my beginning.
Now, Amar Chitrakatha being what it is almost a kind of a brand that parents approve of. It's the kind of role that Sudha Murthy occupies from. You know, the parents desperately want children to read it. Now, whether the children want to or not is a separate matter. So, in your case, how has the tightrope been for you to balance keeping up the tradition and speaking to a very, very differently wired generation? Because I think the leap between the people who are now teenagers or underneath at this point and what we were, I think it's been a very large shift. So what has it been like for you as somebody who is programming the content?
So when we look at content which Amachitra Gatha has been creating over the years, it has been appealing to the family. We have been telling the stories of India. And whenever we work on any of the titles, any of our content that we put out, we see to it there's a lot of research which goes into it before we actually start working on the comics. Reason being that, like they always say, a legacy comes with a huge burden of expectations. And for us, it is that burden that we are now the current, what do you call that, the legacy. I mean, it's on our shoulders to carry this forward. So we say to it that whatever we put it out is thoroughly researched. There's a certain culture of writing that we follow, and there's a certain way that we put out our
Can
comics.
I butt in here with the thing? I heard that the kind of research that goes into a title is 2 years. So we're talking about these slim little comics which have 2 years of research in them. But more importantly, um, I know that the language that you speak of, that you have a certain tonality. Now, Uncle Pai and Gang they were very proper, right? Now, I don't know whether that is something that you follow or whether even with that you've had a shift with.
No, so exactly, we do follow the grammar, which is correct in the sense we follow the British English. We don't use any slangs. We also cater to, so our audience is right somebody who's 8-year-old to an 80-year-old, and that's the vast and the group of people who actually read Amachitra Katha. It's across the length and breadth of India. So when we go out and when we meet a lot of young parents who tell us that they grew up reading Amachitra Katha and they want to pass on the legacy to their children, and that is something which we feel very honored and responsible, saying that okay, this is a brand that we have been entitled to, handle with a lot of care. So whatever we do, like I was talking about the research that we do, we did a title on the Paramvir Chakra awardees. Now that took us almost 3 years because we were covering all the awardees right from 1947, 48 war to the Kargil war.
Okay.
So right from there to today, to the latest wars that we had, the research which took us into getting the costumes right, the artillery, all of that was a mammoth task.
But tell me one thing, there is in a brand that is trying to keep up with the times a lot of pressure to keep mutating, to basically shape shift. So I know that you all have gone digital. I know that you all have come up with new characters. But have they managed to stick like the Supandis? Like Supandi has a special relationship with me because after watching Demi Moore in Ghost, I got a haircut which I thought looked like Demi Moore, but I was informed I looked like Supandi. So that followed me through my teenage years. And I was wondering about whether some of the new things that you have created have stuck like some of the old things that.
So Supandi, of course, is one of the most popular characters, and we always believe that you cannot restrict these characters to the pages in the comic. They have to move out, and that is where these characters are now moving out. We're getting into the digital space, of course. We're getting into animation. We're getting into films.
Successfully?
Yes. So Supandi is going to be launched very soon at the end of this month. Sorry, a couple of months from now. It's going to be on YouTube.
Okay.
So the life of these characters and the life of everything that we create in Amachita and Twinkle has to move on. That
Okay.
is but obvious that we should be doing.
Thank you so much. Moving on to the next person over here, we have Vikas Singh. Now, Vikas Singh is special, and it's somebody that is a recent acquaintance. You know that he has a life outside of comics, brand and marketing professional, etc. But he is what they refer to as a panapictographist, which is a fabulous way of saying somebody who collects comic books. Okay, and he's also a Tintinologist. All of us are mostly Tintinophiles, but he's a Tintinologist also. And it's for me, what is very special is across the board, India is not a very archival culture. The subcontinent is very bad about taking care of its own histories, regardless of what those histories are, right? So the idea of archives, of museum mentality, of holding on to stuff, this is something that is quite scarce. And it is something that we, as people who are trying to put together an exhibition, have recognized just how scanty it is. So I wanted to ask you that this identity of being a collector has not been developed to the way it has in the West. And the idea of communities of collectors of very, very specific stuff does not really exist. And I'm sure you're really interacting with a global community for what you do. I wanted to ask you what inspired you to start collecting in the way that you do, and to what end? Like, what started you off, and क्या आपका aim था in doing this?
See, unfortunately, in India, whatever you do, if you have a hobby, the first thing your parent or your friends are going to ask, क्या फायदा है? What is the cost? Now, Tintin had a very interesting story. I'll quickly narrate. There was once a souvenir sheet that was brought out by Belgium. I collect stamps also. It had 24 images of 24 albums of Tintin, all in different languages. So I said, why not collect each of this album so that, along with your stamps, you can exhibit that also. So those were the first 24 comics, different languages that I first picked up. Now there is a forum called Tintinologists, like what I just said. Now you become a member only if you bring out one fact of Tintin that nobody in the world knows.
Oh, really?
So it gets certified.
Oh,
Now in Tintin in Tibet, Tintin, those of you would have read Tintin would know he gets a letter in which they say Chang is dead, and there is a postmark on that. Those stamps are actual stamps that were brought out by Hong Kong Post.
oh boy.
Now, the moment I discovered that and I was certified as a technologist, then that somebody got back and said, why don't you collect that, the first one which was in Chinese that was banned? China banned because it's called, in the Chinese language, it's called Tintin in Chinese Tibet. So I purchased that. And that's how, it just
How
got out.
old were you when all of this was going on? Clearly beyond your parents' control.
Yeah. I had started working. So
Okay, all right.
So then you start getting other people, start meeting others. They help you grow, and then slowly the collection grows. In fact, there are a few like there is a Tintin in Bulgaria, which only 16 copies exist in the world because rest were all destroyed. It had wrong translation in
I
some
see.
places. Then there's one of which only 50 copies have been printed. And today, this 126 languages, I am the only one in the whole world who has it.
I have this
So,
is
there's one which has just come up, like what you have said. It's the Tintin in Ukrainian language.
hmm.
Now, Ukraine is at war, so it's very difficult to get a copy of that. But I've been looking for it. So it just grows with you, and then there's no end because once you get into
So,
this,
so there is no end to it.
yeah,
There is
there's
no
no end.
means
There's
to an
no end.
end of
Man,
any.
it's a very dangerous business
I see. Okay.
and
So
a very costly one.
I this absolutely. I want to go to the other aspects of your collection, but with regard to Tintin, one question is, what do you think is the reason why people in India are relating so hard to these things? Man? I mean, Tintin to ek baat hai, but like Asterix and all, like what is going on? Like there are many people in West Bengal who believe that Tintin was created by a Bengali.
Yeah.
So what is the scene? What is
See,
your
it's
understanding of it?
simplicity. See, today, the world. I really don't appreciate this word graphic novel. There's nothing like a graphic novel. It's a comics basically.
यहाँ पे
Just
झगड़ा करा दोगे हैं तुम? हाँ.
it's suddenly become a buzzword. Graphic novel, graphic novel. If you look at Tintin, it's the simplicity of the drawing. It's just line drawing, and yet with that line drawing, Hergé could give a variety of expression, not just to Tintin but to his dog also.
Hmm.
And the reason they became very popular, especially in India, was because you could travel the world with Tintin.
Beautiful.
You can go to Switzerland, you can go to Peru, you can go to Sri Lanka, you can go to India. I mean, for us, it's not a big deal, but for Europeans, it's a big deal. So, you travel the world, and every time you read, every time, I bet you will find something new. Asterix is altogether very different. You are in stress, you read one page of Asterix, and I guarantee that stress will go away. Look at the way he has drawn everything, whether the boar is running away from the field or the way, dogmatics cries when a tree is felled. Every single detail which is there in the Aztec, it will take away your stress.
Now, it must be told to the people in this audience that Tintin allows you to go places, but our friend Vikas has actually gone places following Tintin around on what are known as Tintin trails. जिसके एक दो photos हैं, where different things that appear in Tintin are visited. These are across countries. I will not dwell upon it right now. There are other things I need to ask you first, but there is that. Right? Now, one other fascinating feature of Vikas's collection, and that especially resonates with me, is that he has an extraordinary collection of Hindi comics. And ऐसे बहुत सारे कॉमिक्स हैं. आई ग्रू अप स्टडिंग इन अ केंद्रीय विद्यालय स्कूल एंड मेरे सब क्लासमेट्स हिंदी कॉमिक्स पढ़ते थे. दे वर रीडिंग चाचा चौधरी, नागराज, ये सब, द होल गैंग वाज देयर. The Diamond Comics was there and all. And it is beautiful to see somebody having given them the kind of regard that absolutely nobody seems to give them. तो टिंटिन तो खैर इतने सारे पैसे खर्चने के बाद तुम रख दोगे घर पे. The problem with these other things is they've never given the kind of gravitas. So you also have Abid Sufi, who was on our panel last year at Sahitya. His Bahadur ka collection you have in entirety, right? And could you tell us a bit more about your relationship with Hindi comics and what you see over there? Because there was a grand golden age of which, if I even look at comics by the same publishers today, don't have the same jadoo about them. What has been the information about Hindi comics that you've
See,
gathered.
Bahadur was India's first superhero, and this and you know there are, I would consider Bahadur to be one of the biggest example of Indian because if you go through that period, that era, and the things that a normal citizen could do, it's all there in Bahadur. And you know, for the first time, live-in relationship. Now it's become very common, the
Yes.
buzzword. But if you see the relationship between Bela and Bahadur in the comics, it was a live-in relationship. The way he was dressed up, saffron and green. So there were a lot of, and this entire series was actually inspired by a book called Abhishek Chambal, written by Jaya Bahadur's father. So, and there are very few collectors who actually were collecting Bahadur comics. I mean, they were, and that's why I said, why not start collecting them? It took me 15, 16 years. Now, one interesting question you asked, why Indian Hindi comics did not go the way the Western has. That's what I was telling Savvy. Three things we go wrong with marketing. See, the market for comics is not the children. You make money only when you market it, age group 30.
Wow.
That's where a single panel of Tintin gets sold for 3 crores, 3.5 crores. You don't get that much of money from a youth. That's one. Second is nobody is able to build a brand. I mean, you have a lot of publishers in comics today. We know what is happening with the Raj comics. I will not dwell how the
Yeah.
guys are fighting it. Nobody is trying to make a brand. First, make a brand. Then you look at merchandising. Here, one comic comes out, you have 6 variants. Who will buy a comic with 6 variant covers if there is no demand for the first comic itself? And then the push to merchandise. Merchandise will follow only when the brand is there. Third is the storyline. Of late, we are making the storylines very, very complex. If you read some of the new ones which have come up, they have become so complex as if somebody is trying to give a lot of yarn in that. If you make something very what don't try to copy
Actually,
what
that's something
Watchman has done.
no, that's actually
So
something very interesting you're saying because when you analyze Tintin, you also had a feeling that it is the simplicity that is
correct.
sticky in your analysis, right? This is fantastic, and hopefully in the Q&A we'll come back to this. I have one last question to ask you. What are the technical difficulties? Now, I visited another kindred spirit of yours in Bangalore called Mr. Arun Prasad, and उसका घर तो भैया, it's like some kind of Aladdin the cave. It's insane how many comics he's got. कुछ सत्यजीत रे ने किया हुआ cover, कुछ ये, कुछ वो, कुछ like unbelievable stuff before Amar Chitrakarta. Unbelievable. Basically, I don't know how his family has not thrown him out because I think the comics are like pushing the family out of the house. So I wanted to ask you about the technicalities of what it means to archive paper material in the kind of ruthless weather conditions that exist in yeah.
see, I learned a lot from Arun. He's a very good friend, and that's what is good about the small community of collectors. But two, three things you need to keep in mind. Obviously, it has to be with a proper backing card, which has to be acid free. Most of what is printed in is the acidic content is very high. And second is to store them very carefully and not read them more often. So
Oh
better
shit!
to create a PDF because
Don't
the
expect to
bright
borrow anything from
10
this
out of
man.
10 will only come if there's not a single amount of crease on that, which is like brand new, which is impossible. Most comics in our country would come in a grade 3.5. So
Okay.
best is to keep them on a SD backing card, keep them in a poly sheet
But
away
is
from
it a
sun.
climate controlled room or something?
No,
Like,
no, no. Okay. Keep it in acid free and you keep it moisture proof. There are a lot of charcoal based things which have moisture, but you have to keep them very careful.
okay. Thank you so much. Moving along to the next person, who is as different gets from the ones that have spoken before. This is Sumit Kumar, and him I see as occupying a very amazing role as being a cusp between an artist entrepreneur. And Sumit is from what I've observed, not a target audience for my writing, for sure. Basically, if there is something, basically, Sumit has made a famous statement that he's much more into the Borat school of narratorial stewardship than the Amir Khan film, where Amir Khan is a goody two shoes, the best at everything. So self seriousness doesn't go far with this gentleman. But what is absolutely beautiful about Sumit is that there is a very studied irreverence, and a continuous play between political awareness and toilet humor. Like basically Naxalbari at one end and Ichhadari Tatti at the other. So basically, we are speaking about something of this sort. And there is in him a very, very strong commitment to using the uh, slapdash, irreverent, comic, over-the-top style. This is not noir humor. That is something that has marked his work, and I wanted to actually talk to you about it because I've been specially protective of Sumit, much to his horror, I'm sure. But the reality is that somebody who goes the route of humor is always the most vulnerable person in a room. And there is a very, very simple reason for this, in my understanding, which is that people who are self-serious get quickly discarded because they're so boring. Basically, yeah, bore with it. But somebody who is using humor, and I fall in that category. Nobody pelts me because nobody goes to the end of my books most of the time. Now, someone like Sumit, the issue is that the humor is accessible and people understand it. तो उनको पता चल रहा है भैया क्या हो रहा है ऊपर से तुम drawing करो. So the thing is, it's a very vulnerable space to occupy. And that's why I wanted to ask him questions that actually discuss this thing. So between the thin skin of woke people on one end, and they're extremely thin-skinned, as we all know, and the thin skin of fundamentalists, तुम्हारा काम, your work is not made extremely easy somewhere over here. So the creator of accessible humor is vulnerable. And how would you describe your readership? Like, are you protected because it's niche readership? What is going on with this? And also, your tonality has got a certain locker room, boy, frat boy kind of energy about it. Have you seen that shifting as you reluctantly move along chronologically? क्या हो रहा है उसमें?
Uh, so number one तो I think I was discussing it with you also कि कॉमिक्स बनाने का फायदा ये है उसको बहुत कम लोग पढ़ते हैं तो आप
सही बात.
काफी चीजें कर सकते हो you can actually be as much on the face as you want compared to if you're a YouTuber तो I
Or unless you're a cartoonist in press, I'm guessing.
maybe तो that is one benefit second about humor its tonality and progression तो for sure मतलब I think कि मैं पैदा गधा हुआ था जो धीरे-धीरे चीज़ें सीख तो तो as a born Gada, I think my first work was obviously Dumber, and then the second one, and I also come from a family जहाँ मतलब दूर-दूर तक आर्टिस्ट, राइटर सब छोड़ो, मेरे फैमिली में सारे लोग या तो गुंडे हैं या पुलिस में हैं। तो बेसिकली बिल्कुल कोई डिस्कशन कभी हुआ नहीं है ऑफ एथिक्स, मोरालिटी कुछ भी तो धीरे-धीरे मुझे मैंने सीखा है वो सब क्या होता है मतलब ऑब्वियसली एज़ आई लर्न आई इम्प्रूव बट आई डोंट लाइक द आइडिया ऑफ गोइंग बैक एंड फिक्सिंग माय वर्क बट जहाँ चांस मिलता है आई फील लाइक इट आई डू
Have you ever looked back with regret at humor that may have been funny to the inside group but caused damage to other people? Like, has there been some kind of that sort of equation with your work?
all humor will cause damage to somebody
Okay.
humor doesn't come without a cost
Mm.
so mostly that's why I do self deprecation but हाँ humor हमेशा at cost to somebody तो for example the political comics I write I उसमें है टारगेट जो उस टाइम उस हिस्ट्री में गधे थे
Mm.
राइट फॉर एग्जांपल कश्मीर में फारूक अब्दुल्ला गधा था उस पूरी स्टोरी में तो उसका मजाक उड़ाया ज्यादातर
Okay.
ऐसे
ना मुझे आपसे ये भी पूछना पड़ेगा कि आपने काफ़ी अनयूजुअल सब्जेक्ट्स चूज़ करे हैं। तो एक तो देयर वाज़ अ कॉमिक दैट वाज़ बेस्ड ऑन नक्सलबाड़ी, देयर वाज़ वन दैट वाज़ मेड ऑन बेस्ड ऑन कश्मीर एंड I understand that you clearly are deeply moved by these themes, and here too you have chosen the route of humor to move along. And this brings me to something very interesting because I have been reading somebody like Joe Sacco since the very beginning. And I find it very, very compelling to read something like journalism or read something like, the early, the safe area, there things like that. I found that these books impossible to get to. Like the earnestness in the research now reached such levels कि वो पढ़ ही नहीं पाते. It's very hard. So what was your, how did you work through these themes using humor and what were the roadblocks that you met and what was it like for you?
तो नंबर वन तो बेसिकली ये कश्मीर एंड नक्सल कॉमिक्स they happened because News Laundry wanted to do it. And I was really young at that time and like a dumb donkey, I said yes. And then I realized what I had said yes to. And then when I started researching, everything I've written in the book is a first reaction of somebody who's seeing it for the first time, those horrors for the first time, and somebody who's smacking his head for the first time.
Right.
So it's a book which I call like पहली book है जो आप पढ़ते हो, ये last book नहीं है जो आप पढ़ोगे. तो
Excellent. That's.
हाँ, तो that's that. उसके अलावा
Has
second चीज,
there been some resistance from people within about you telling their story or you telling their story in that tonality?
no, because I haven't done too much opinion in it.
Mhm.
I have stuck to facts and I have played between facts and comedy. I
Okay.
haven't claimed that I know something.
My last question to you, actually, you recently went to the US and you did almost like a travelogue. So this was must about putting yourself out there with socio-cultural details. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about that? And actually, unconnectedly, इनके बहुत सारे पहलू अलग-अलग हैं. He has been on TV. He has been in the Shark Tank. He is like an animator. He has got something called Pucker Max, which deals with web comics. So there is a lot of things that are going on. And it's one of the few people that has very proudly asserted the importance of making money being a comics creator, which is something everybody seems to pretend like they run on some fuel which is not money, you know. So what has it been like? Unconnected questions. Any last closing words on these things?
So for the US one, I think वहाँ मेरा फेवरेट पार्ट था कि मैं एक स्ट्रिप क्लब में गया था और स्ट्रिपर से पॉलिटिक्स डिस्कस होनी शुरू हो गई और फिर मैं और वो लड़ने लग गए और वो मेरे बाल नोच रही थी, मैं उसके बाल नोच रहा था. तो वो आई थिंक सबसे मजेदार पार्ट था वहाँ.
Hmm.
उसके बाद दूसरा जो है कि अबाउट ऑल दीज थिंग्स, मतलब it's just trying to, like he said, the things are not there. It's a really small industry. So basically, my goal is to give myself a job. So I do whatever it takes to keep giving myself a job. So I think that's
Okay.
it.
Thank you so much. The problem with asking questions like this is that I sometimes forget to flip the slides. But take Lobby, fill your eyes. Okay. I'm leaving it to all of you to go ahead to explore their work, order them from the respective websites, wherever online. I'm sure you'll do it. The next person that we're going to be speaking with is Harsho over here. Harsho and I go back a bit of a distance. Now, to me, this is probably hands down one of the most prolific comic book artists that exists in India. So much so that I actually believe that Harsho has probably collaborated with everybody under the sun. You know, like he has done stuff with us in the web app that we're doing. I think he's done stuff with Amar Chitragatha. I think he's like collaborated with pretty much everybody around and many people that are not around here also. And he also has a very extremely uh, unique style, which when it is at its best, reminds me of Mad Magazine's Mort Drucker, who used to do these fantastic film spoofs. And Harsho's style, at a certain pitch, always reminds me of that gorgeousness of that. And one thing about him that I'm always curious about is not just is the work very high caliber, or whether it is your preferred style or not, that is a whole different question, but it is of a very high technical level and it is a very high volume. Like, how do you pull it off? And you've got like two twins and like another woman running your life. Like, how do you do this, Harsho? I think it just has to be asked. Here. Pass on a mic that does work. So, um,
Okay.
Yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
the voice can resonate. Thank you for saying all this about me. So, comics is what I love doing. So, like, your question was basically about how do I consistent working
How
on
do
this?
you manage high technical quality of work plus
Right.
volume? Because it is mad. The speed is mad. I don't even know how many pages you generate
No,
in a year.
luckily, around about now, earlier, about 5 years back, I had a plan of doing roughly around 30 pages a month. Yeah, and the voice we heard that now. Yeah, thanks. So earlier we had a plan. I had a plan, like I had to plan roughly around 30 to 28 pages per month.
30 pages a month.
Per month. But right now, as it so happens, due to projects coming in
And
and
look at the
comics,
style, okay? It was 30 pages a month.
well, now it's gone to 60. So that's projects coming and yeah. I'm sitting in drawing. Actually, that's what I bring a diary with me all the time to draw. Like Savio over here, so he's been drawing while he's been over here in Delhi. So that's what we artists do. We creators, we who create comics. So
Yeah,
our modus
listen, you
operandi.
speak for yourself. I do one book in
No, no,
4
no.
years. Yes.
No, no. Happily, I know most of you guys out here, and I can speak to Fabio, I can speak for him, I can speak for him. So we've been working together. That field of comics is interesting because there are some people out here that I know that I've worked with before. So the field of comics is fun because it's up to us as to how we work on it and how we, tend towards going to achieving the number of pages we want. But number of pages again is dependent upon the projects we get. Like for example, when I was working with you for Optique, so that was fun because that was web comics, a different portal altogether. And the way comics has moved in recent times from being just something in print to completely out of print at times to digital domains, that's been very interesting.
Now, Harshoka, one other thing which I have to remark on is that he has got a very, very son of the soil quality about his drawing. It's very Indian comics. It's not trying to look like manga from Japan. It's not trying to look like Marvel. It's very, very off here. Like it's one of the most rooted styles that I've seen, and I think that's pretty admirable. Um, what has been collaboration like for you with all these very many temperaments and people and different kinds of projects that you have done? And are there things that you solo as well with the writing and text, or it's mostly with art aspect?
Well, earlier I used to write and draw, simultaneously. But after a certain while, I figured out that while I'm drawing, if I want to focus on that, then I need to give the writing piece a break. So that's when I started collaborating with friends, with different houses. Like for Ramachitrakatha, we've been working together for roughly around, I think, about 19 years almost. So for ACK and for Comic Sense, I've been working for the last 3, 4 years.
He's got everybody on the panel covered basically. Have you
Yeah,
done
more or
something with
less.
Bharat as well?
Bharat and I, we are friends and we've known each other for a long, long time. We haven't had a chance to work together yet. So things are still being planned. An anthology is in the works. Hope for a comic magazine, a monthly or a bi-monthly one, is in the works. But again, this is India where things fluctuate quite a lot and we don't get what we deserve and what we want.
Something that I have always noticed in your conversations has been that you seem to make a lot of excursions to do comic-related teaching in schools and amongst younger people. How one fits that with 60 pages a day, I don't even want to ask any questions about that. I mean,
A month.
correct, okay, 60 a month. What is this aspect of your life like? And also, a couple of questions to do with this. Now, you're working with Indian kids. I'm guessing some of them are like young teenagers.
Well, all ages actually. Basically, I start with kids who are like my daughters. They're roughly around 8 years. They're twins, but they started drawing and exploring into comics when they were 3 years, 2 years. So that's the age group I start with. So I've been to different schools. I've done workshops with them. Happily, in recent times, there have been universities which have invited me over. So students who are learning mass comm or who are learning animation, they are getting to know about comics from me. So that's what we're trying to do. Basically, introduce comics as a field where you can, you know, make a learning, make a living in the end.
As someone who has observed waves and waves of younger people of a different age group, what are the roadblocks that you observe for specifically Indian artists or young people trying to do comics in India? Are you noticing a certain, like, especially as somebody who has a very local flavor to their work, are you seeing roadblocks in their thought process? And what are the kind of things that younger people want to be drawing right now, or writing right now?
About the Indian content, very good that you pointed it out because right now there is an influx of
I should
manga.
just hold the mic up, sir.
There is an influx of manga right now, and kids in schools and colleges that I've been to, for some reason, they are driven quite a lot to manga, which is strange, not to DC and Marvel, but to manga. And where personally I don't have anything against manga, it's a lovely form of art. And but again, with Japanese content, if we create manga, it won't be considered as manga. So that's why I always tell them to create your own art styles, figure out your Indian content rather than tend to what the Japanese guys are doing.
And one other thing, like I remember when I was very small and we were only reading Enid Blytons and all, which reveals to you what my demographic age group is. But the point is, we were always writing stories where women were called Emily and somebody was called Jack. And somehow when you put like a Suresh and Ramesh, it just became like a story that you didn't want to write or read, and that was a kind of hideous, self-wounding kind of thing that existed then. So are you seeing some of that even right now? The stories have some kind of a deracinated
Well,
situation.
depends. To the recent school and college events I've been to, the students I've interacted with, they have been quite open. So when I told them create your own character, create your own story, so they have been pretty open. So they haven't relied on what the Western world has given us. So for example, in my days, like you were talking about Tintin, so Tintin, Asterix, Archie comics, that's what we were addicted to. In fact, half the comics at the time were Phantom and Mandrake. And for some reason, I got the impression they were Indian. At least I think most of us thought that they were Indian also, like us, because we were looking at their comics in Bengali and English, in other languages as well. And we got the impression that that was the world we were living in. But things have changed. And nowadays, the influx of comics is good, but it can be a bit better as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Moving along, I hope that the rest of the panelists, I know it's such a long train journey over here. I hope you're filing some questions to ask each other because I can imagine how tedious it is to just sit and wait it through. Um, Sahitya should know that when you invite comic book artists, कोई नहीं नहीं बोलता है, सब आ जाते हैं. So maybe we should do a slightly smaller panel next time. But moving along to Raj, who likes to be called Raj. And basically, Raj is special for a very specific reason. I've been trying to get her onto this panel for the last 2 years, actually, and I finally succeeded. The reason why is that Raj has written and drawn a particular illustrated work. Now, I myself, my head is boggled with terms. I mean, the comics, graphic novel, chodo, I don't even, I'm just calling them visual stories and illustrated books and all kinds of other things now. But this particular narrative, what makes it special is that it is written in a dialect called Chota Nagpuri, which is spoken in some parts of Jharkhand, right? So it is written, conceived of, it is about that area, and it is written in Chota Nagpuri. It is about a character from that context. And here's something very beautiful. She actually taught herself to work in the local Madhubani style of artwork to draw and write this particular story. So it is pretty fantastic. And in one of the interviews, I mentioned to her outside also, I get very excited when I realize that now finally, जैसे कि हर social movement में ऐसे layers होते हैं कि पहले like founding fathers were all highly elite society and पढ़े लिखे abroad kind of situation, and then you start handing over to the people of the land, like it becomes earthier and earthier, and it has been very slow to happen in comics and graphic novels where the stories have actually been taken over from people of the insect जो कि अपनी मातृभाषा में लिख रहे हैं. ये बहुत कम संख्या में है लोग. इसीलिए जब हम सुनते हैं कि लोग जैसे कि मलयालम में जोशी बेनेडिक्ट ने पिग फ्लिप नाम नाम की एक कथा लिखी है ग्राफिक नॉवल, या फिर लोकेश खोडके नाम के एक हैं जनाब जो कि अभी बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग पल्प पल्प फिक्शन वेरी स्मार्ट kind of work that is happening entire Hindi. It's been written in Hindi. मुझे बहुत खुशी हुई है खुद personally. So I wanted to talk to you about one specific thing. You told me, not told me, you told them that there is something about the resonant quality about Chota Nagpuri or the way that it is spoken is very particular. And that when you first went to Bombay, it was almost a source of ridicule because there was no glamour associated with that kind of way of speaking. But you were always very loyal to it. You thought that there was something about it that was special, and you held on to that. So would you talk to me about just आप हिंदी में बात कर सकते हैं? What it's like? Just pass the moving mic along. I know the one is working. It's working.
I think it is working.
Yeah, just hold it close to you.
मैंने जो ग्राफिक नॉवल बनाया सबसे पहले तो ट्रू स्टोरी
Not
पे
very-
तो मैंने जो ग्राफिक नॉवल बनाया मुझे भी ग्राफिक नॉवल बड़ा एक्चुअली पसंद नहीं है, मुझे भी कॉमिक्स ही पसंद है. मैं भी पढ़ी हुई हूँ कॉमिक्स पढ़ के, तो मुझे कॉमिक्स ही अच्छा लगता है. लेकिन मैंने जो बनाया है वो एक मेरे भाई की कहानी है, और वो क्योंकि ट्रू स्टोरी थी, मेरे अपने भाई की कहानी.
अच्छा, ये मुझे पता नहीं था.
हाँ, वो मेरे अपने भाई की कहानी थी, तो मेरा सबसे पहला, और वो मैं बना रही थी एक बच्चों की चिल्ड्रन मैगज़ीन के लिए. तो एक्चुअली वो पहले किताब की तरह नहीं छपी है, वो पहले एपिसोडिक स्टोरी की तरह छपी है एक चिल्ड्रन मैगज़ीन में, व्हिच इज़ कॉल्ड चकमक. चकमक जो एक पब्लिकेशन से निकलती है, अभी भी निकलती है. तो बच्चे की कहानी थी, बच्चे के लिए सुनानी थी, और मेरा सिर्फ़ और सिर्फ़ एक मकसद था कि मुझे ट्रूथफुल होना है. क्योंकि जब मेरे भाई ने मुझे कहानी दी, उसके 1 महीने बाद वो हमें छोड़कर चला गया. मेरे पास नहीं था वो रेफ़रेंस के लिए, मेरे पास नहीं था वो कि मैं उससे कुछ पूछ सकूँ,
हाँ.
उसकी कहानी जान सकूँ, और मैंने उसे प्रॉमिस किया था कि इस कहानी पे मैं कुछ करूँगी. और right after 1 month he was gone. So I had this huge responsibility to bring this story as truthfully as I could. So that is how I started making it. और ठीक उसके 6 महीने पहले ही मैंने मधुबनी अपने आप से ही मधुबनी सीखना शुरू किया था. and Madhubani is a art from Bihar and Jharkhand. So it fitted very well actually. और जब मेरे पास ये क्वेश्चन आया कि मैं इसको लिखूं कैसे, तो बिहार और झारखंड में एक चीज है जो आप पता नहीं, अगर आप उस क्षेत्र से बिलोंग करते हैं तो आप शायद जानते होंगे, और अगर नहीं करते हैं तो शायद आपने ऑब्जर्व किया होगा कि वी आर नॉट वेरी प्राउड ऑफ आवर कल्चर। पीपल फ्रॉम बिहार एंड झारखंड आर यूजुअली नॉट वेरी प्राउड ऑफ, और उसमें लालू यादव का बहुत बड़ा हाथ है। पर उसके पहले भी ये था, पर उनके बाद तो बहुत ही ज्यादा हो गया। तो हमें हिंदी बोलना, मतलब कोई भी इंसान, चाहे वो मराठी हो, चाहे गुजराती हो, चाहे वो कहीं का भी हो, बंगाली हो, वो हिंदी अपने मातृभाषा की टच में ही बोलता है। शुद्ध हिंदी कोई भी नहीं बोलता, पर किसी को शर्म नहीं आती, पर हमें आती है। तो हमें आती है। जब मैं दिल्ली में जॉब कर रही थी, और जब आप बोलते हो, किसी से कोई बात करते हो और आपको कोई पहचान लेता है कि आप तो वहाँ के लग रहे हो, और वो सुनकर आपको खुशी नहीं होती, आपको दुःख होता है, दैट मीन्स इट मीन्स समथिंग। And I gradually discovered this about myself, and I gradually discovered this about my family members and other friends जो कि उस एरिया से बिलोंग करते हैं, कि हमें क्यों अपनी भाषा से इतनी मुश्किल है, हमें क्यों अपनी पहचान से इतनी मुश्किल है। और जब मैं भिक्षु की कहानी लिख लिख रही थी, तो मेरे लिए बहुत बड़ा क्वेश्चन था कि मैं इसको लिखूं कैसे, क्योंकि मैंने जब शुरू किया तो मुझे तो मेरी मातृभाषा शुरुआत में नेचुरली डिडंट फ्लो, it didn't come. The story didn't come in my own language, but later on I realized after a few pages कि ये मैं कर ही नहीं सकती। अगर मैं इसको शुद्ध हिंदी कर दूँ, तो ये कहानी मैं लिख ही नहीं सकती। तो दैट इज़ हाउ इट, मतलब ये चीज़ पहले हुई, और जैसे-जैसे मैंने अपनी भाषा के साथ काम किया, तो मुझे अपनी भाषा के बारे में बहुत सारी चीज़ें रियलाइज़ हुई। अपने बारे में बहुत सारी चीज़ें रियलाइज़ हुई कि अगर आप अपनी भाषा के करीब आते हो, अपनी सच्चाई के करीब आते हो, तो आपकी कहानी में जो एक इनविजिबल लेयर आता है, वो उसको यूनिवर्सल बनाता है, क्योंकि वो सच्चाई का लेयर है। आप झूठ होके यूनिवर्सल नहीं हो सकते। आपको सच होना ही पड़ेगा यूनिवर्सल होने के
दिस
लिए।
इज एब्सोल्युटली ब्यूटीफुल एंड ये सुनकर भी बहुत खुशी हुई कि आपको अपने बारे में स्लोली ये पता चला।
स्लोली मुझे
तो
पता
जैसे
चला।
कि मैं भी जब आदि पर्व और सौप्तिक मेरे जो मिथोलॉजिकल बुक्स हैं, वो काम करने से पहले मुझे इनके बारे में कुछ भी पता नहीं था। मैं बहुत वेस्टर्नाइज़ थी, बिल्कुल पता नहीं था, और शायद मुझे नहीं चाहिए था वो सब। सो आई रिक्लेम्ड इट एंड आई रियलाइज्ड दैट जर्नी एंड द ब्यूटी ऑफ दैट जर्नी ऑफ रिक्लेमिंग योर ओन मटेरियल। या
सो और वो मतलब वो हमेशा मतलब मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि अपने नज़दीक जब आप आते हो, तो जब आप आ रहे हो, तो आपको नहीं पता लग सकता। वो हाइंडसाइट में ही पता लगता है।
राज,
तो
मुझे आपको और एक बात पूछनी थी, जस्ट इन इंटरेस्ट ऑफ आस्किंग यू ऑल द क्वेश्चंस इन टाइम, व्हिच इज कि इंडियन ग्राफिक नॉवेल सीन में ये पहली बार नहीं है कि कोई some story is being told with a alliance between traditional art forms and a graphic story. Okay. So for example, the most recently अपना ये जो सीता's Ramayan was done in पट्टचित्र के साथ collaborate करके, there was Bhimayana which was done in Bone Dark, if I'm not mistaken, with the type, and one book which nobody talks about, एक गौतम भाटिया की लाय नाम की बुक थी which was done with miniature artist के साथ। लेकिन इन सब में एक commonality थी that they were all very lopsided collaborations in that. I'm not dissing the books, but they were lopsided in that the artist was almost like an artisan commissioned to do it, and there was a writer who was often an urban Indian educated person who was orchestrating this whole process. So I don't know if you're familiar with these works. Other panelists can pitch in on this later on when we talk about stuff about what the politics of these kind of collaborations are versus doing it yourself.
हाँ, वही जो मतलब विकास जी ने भी जो बोला कि अगर आप उस जगह के हो, अगर आप उस भाषा को बोलते हो, अगर आप उस कल्चर के हो, तो आप बहुत सारी बातें उसमें ऐसी लेकर आते हो जो आपको, जब आप ड्रॉ कर रहे हो, जब आप लिख रहे हो, आपको पता ही नहीं होता। एंड दैट इज़ कॉल्ड ऑथेंटिसिटी। And when you don't know when you are being authentic, and when you push yourself to be authentic, then you become fake. So that's the difference, I feel.
Can I ask you a question? So Bhiksu was a story based in that area, and therefore you learned Madhubani. So which means if
No, no,
Raj
no.
writes another book, will it be in a Madhubani
Yes,
style?
it could be.
It could be. Okay.
Definitely, it could be.
Okay.
Because I am me only, so I will, and I believe, because I am not a very literary person. मैं बहुत पढ़ती नहीं हूँ, मैं चीजें देखती हूँ मैं अगर किताब भी उठाती हूँ तो मैं किताब देखती ही रह जाती हूँ, मैं पढ़ना होता ही नहीं है मुझसे।
एक और
तो
पहलू, there's one aspect of your work which I will not talk about now because I need to move on to the next person,
Yeah.
is the fact that it is all very good that I'll write a book in like, Dogri, and I'll write a book in like something else. But खरीदेगा कौन, छापेगा कौन, the numbers, who is going to publish it, what are the print runs, these are all insane questions. And many times the desire for authenticity is curbed because there is no way for somebody to actually publish it in a viable way. We'll get to that in our last segment when the questions are open to everybody. Moving on to इसका तो मैंने कुछ भी नहीं दिखा है, seriously. देख लो भैया. These are the artworks, beautifully rendered. There is text, it flows, it follows the idiom of Madhubani. Uh, the panels are sometimes rectangular, but sometimes organic forms are used. Color coding for different characters, which is very interesting. Please buy the books. If you love art, if you like artists, kindly Libgen pe jaake PDF na download kare. Please buy the books, buy them as gifts, do these things. Yeah. Next, I move on to Troop Sandhu, who I hope everybody can see. She's sitting at the corner here. And Ikrup and I are meeting for the first time. Like another person I've been waiting to talk to. Ikrup took it upon herself, actually with conversations with Arpita of Yoda Press, to do a graphic memoir, a graphic biography of sorts of Bhagat Singh, and it was called Inkilab. It was called Inkilab Zindabad. And Ikrup did this work. Now, Ikrup happens to be also from the Majha peoples of Punjab, which is the same pool of people from where Bhagat Singh emerged. For whoever loves this kind of detail, which is me. Also, she did this at a very strange time in our collective history. She was doing this in 2019, जब तो दुनिया ही बंद पड़ गई थी. So basically, she could not even access libraries which had got materials with this stuff. Engaging with people and experts was a bit difficult. लेकिन सबसे interesting thing about Ikrup was not just that she did this, but there's something else which I was very intrigued by. I find in Ikrup a very great commitment to not be polarized about your feelings about subject matters. And one of the reasons why she was attracted to Bhagat Singh was because she found that he could be a bridge where the polarized meet. So जो लोग भगत सिंह को केवल स्वतंत्रता सेनानी करके फ्लैटन करते हैं, they forget that this was a boy who died at 23, which means that he did his seminal writing and thinking at 21. Like, what are people like us doing at 20 and 21? His life's body of work, which is impressive even to read right now, was done then. And in flattening, we forget that this was a person with very open-ended. It was a person who actually had communist meanings also. So there were all kinds of things which were fantastic. And Ikrup's own desire to bring complexity into the conversation attracted me about her efforts with this book. So the book is, I personally feel the book could have benefited from somebody else doing a typography because I feel that the beauty of the artwork, sometimes the text gets in the way it appears. It's also very hybrid. It's sometimes like regular comics, sometimes it's like an illustrated book. अलग-अलग चीजें चल रही हैं. So Ikrup, just wanted to leap straight into asking you some questions about this. Um, Clearly, your interviews indicate that you could be the bridge where the polarized meet also. You created this work at a very interesting time. Could you tell me a bit more about what it was like for you to not be taken over by some propaganda view of what Bhagat Singh looked like? Because remember, this is also a time where there was a farmers' protest going on. This is also a time where there were a lot of things going on. There were attacks on students in libraries. A lot of us were very not at peace because it was a complex time, regardless of where you stood in your politics, right? So I want to know how you kept the nuance and complexity in telling the story of a very nuanced and complex person.
gosh, that was it was 2019 was when you saw students being dragged out, being beaten up in Jamia and JNU. We saw all of that very close up, and social media was like bombarding you with all these images. And that's when I had begun studying Bhagat Singh, and it felt like nothing had changed. They were doing this to students then, they're doing it to students now. So Bhagat Singh was a student at the time when he was basically hanged. And he was a student leader and he was an organizer. So somewhere I just empathized with that student who was being beaten up, and I had to find the voice of that person through Bhagat Singh. And I was like, okay, how do we now make the majority of the people who are calling them Tukde Tukde gang and kind of completely dismissing them as anti-national? How do I change that? But because Bhagat Singh was also called a terrorist and he was also called anti-national at one point by different leaders of whether it was the Indian national movement, Congress leaders, etc. So I was like, this is the same, similar kind of a reflection, and it's been almost 100 years. So I had I kind of gone through the lens of only presenting the student's point of view and not Bhagat Singh's point of view. Bhagat is that bridge, like I said, left and the right both want to appropriate him because he stood for the best things that we wish to see in the world. And just getting his writings out and letting people read most of that stuff that we actually don't know he wrote about being an atheist, being a communist, willingly being hanged, not asking for clemency, denying mercy.
Actually, one detail is that he asked for a firing squad because he said that that's what
Yeah.
soldiers should die like, and not
Yes.
with being hanged like some thief or like some criminal.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. I
I
mean, that
mean,
was his wish, not of letting him go and maaf kar do bhaiya.
incredible. And you saw that being echoed in the students in 2019, and now like their spirit has been pretty much destroyed, but there is still hope and sparks of using Bhagat's writing or his life and kind of reminding people who we are as a nation and what should we expect of this country. So, and the farmers' protest was the perfect, I mean, it was sad that it happened, but it was the perfect fuel for a perfect storm inside me, where I was being introduced to an ideology which I had kind of overlooked. And I was getting radicalized just reading Bhagat Singh and watching the farmers' protest. And I realized that we need to bring in Bhagat even to understand the farmers' protest because the context of it is still Pagdi Samhal Jatta happened over a century ago, and the same thing is happening now with the farmers' protest. And where have we gone wrong in all of those years? It's absurd. So that is like, I mean, that's what kept me, fueled.
How long did you take to finish the work?
It took me about 2 years,
And
and
you mentioned that you drew and wrote the work
yeah,
with
yeah.
editorial freedom on both, or was the writing co-written with Yoda since they had commissioned the work?
Not really. So they were fantastic. They kind of let me have a go at it and they helped me edit it. But I was pretty much given the free run of like writing, which was super
So,
exciting.
what is to me very interesting is this thing about whether a character is appropriated by both sides. So, there are two things, just like the thin skin of the woke and the thin skin of the fundamentalist. Similarly, there is the issue of somebody who you think was a fine chap being appropriated by somebody you don't like, but there is the other issue of somebody being blanked out of the face of books and history and everything because the other person doesn't like them. So it's kind of an interesting negotiation with what happens with stories and why it is so important that all kinds of people tell stories. एक किस्म का स्टोरी टेलर नहीं होना चाहिए कभी भी किसी भी चीज के बारे में regardless of the politics. I think it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, this was actually the point that you're bringing up is, you know, Arpita offered me Bhagat Singh. She said, you should write a book about Bhagat Singh. I don't want to write a book about a man. There are so many stories about men, heroes, etc. No, no, no. She said, okay, just read. Why don't you read him? Read his writings and then come back to me. And I read his writings and I said, frankly, there aren't many women who've written about him. And this is my chance to change the lens of how we are viewing him. And recently, I was narrating it on Instagram. There was a podcast reel that was made and it went viral. And I could see that because it's a woman narrating the last days of Bhagat Singh, the number of women in the comments fighting, disagreeing with fundamentalists or leftists was much larger than I had assumed. And I felt that I was being the bridge for the women who probably weren't who hadn't associated or hadn't thought that they should have opinions about it, or had opinions were hesitant about sharing them openly. That, I mean, I feel like something opens up when you change the people who write, who tell the
On
stories.
that beautiful note, moving along to Bharat, I have a feeling we may, I don't know what we're going to do about Q&A because we're running fabulously short of time. But anyway, um, hopefully, yeah, hopefully this has been rich for you anyway. So, Bharat, again, यहाँ पे ना बहुत सारे hyphenated लोग हैं boss. Like people seem to be like these mutating creatures जिनका who's Bharat, for example, is a animator slash film director slash educator, also a comic artist who happens to teach comics at Srishti currently. So I mean, it's that kind of a entity. I remember having met your work first in 2010 when I read The Vanished Path, which your then wife and you had kind of, I think there was a travelogue that you all did,
It was a travelogue, yeah.
right? Visiting the places where the Buddha was born, lived, taught, died, and sort of layering it with a personal narrative sort of a journey, right? Now, even back then, when I read The Vanished Path, I was like, right, okay, there we have you. And
That's at Indie Comics Fest.
in the comics fest. Hopefully, we'll talk about those. I don't you know how. So essentially, even back then, it was clear that Tatsumi Yoshihiro, Taniko Chijiro, and Tezuka Osamu had figured as very big personal inspirations. Is what appeared then through conversations that we had in public,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And as a filmmaker too, you have worked on a documentary about Japanese comic subcultures.
Yeah.
So could you tell us how and where you got so marked by the Japanese tradition? So we have one Franco-Belgian situation going on over there. We have one back to the grassroots going on over here.
Right.
Sumit ka kya chal raha hai, Bhagwan jane. But basically, I wanted to ask you where this whole Japanese writing happened over
Yeah,
here.
but interestingly, even Hergé was very marked by Yang Chong Chen, who's a
Correct.
Chinese artist,
Correct.
and it was a huge influence on his style. So there's been
Okay.
that. uh, but coming to manga, it was, I think, like I was studying film in Calcutta, and that was the early 2000s, and suddenly there was like lots of secondhand or unused manga that was dumped into the Indian market. That was the first exposure to manga that I had. In fact, nobody in India knew about manga till then. None of us were exposed to it. We didn't even know that the Japanese had such a huge comics culture. It was a strange kind of like a void in our
Yes.
knowledge of comics. And suddenly I read Tezuka Buddha, and then that gave me the idea that I could also draw comics. something, something about I think it's not simplicity, but the use of the black and white line art, and this kind of sprawling storytelling.
Okay.
That was something that affected me, because all these other European books had these very, very short, tight knit narratives, and in 60 pages, 90 pages.
Right.
These went on for like 100
Soap
pages.
opera type. Chal raha hai.
Yeah, so but I mean, it was, but they could actually stretch the action, and I found so many innovative graphics techniques in them, which I didn't find in the European comics. So I was excited by that.
I noticed that there is something in the fair. Now, Bharat is also a publisher of comics. So there are many people, I don't know whether on this panel, but there are various people who he has collaborated and published in his various things. I wanted to ask you about what led to the idea and execution of Verite, where from what I understand, I've not seen it, there seem to be people of different cultures and countries featuring the same.
Well, it's Japanese alternative manga on one side, which is reads right to left from the back side of the book,
Wonderful.
and on the front side of the book is Indian comics. But also there are stories which are try to be serious as literature, quote unquote. So, I mean, I tried to kind of uh, create a dialogue
Hmm.
between Japanese, not the mainstream Japanese comics, but the alternative Japanese comics that really took the form seriously and raised it to the level of literature in the 1960s and 70s. So we republished those things. Many of them were out of print.
Okay.
These artists, even in Japan.
Okay.
So So
Wow.
Verite was a space where these things happened. Like,
Very kind of fierce kind of covers and such.
yeah, that isn't, well, long story about that comic, but
Huh.
anyway,
Huh.
it's about an outcast samurai.
And
Yeah.
this one that I'm seeing here, I can see quite a lot of names that you know.
Yeah. So on one side is of course there's a French artist also.
Who did Alcazar, which you published?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in fact, the excerpt from Alcazar was first published
I
in
see.
Verite. Yeah.
Okay. Mm.
And these are Japanese artists. Tada Otsuge, in fact, Susumu Katsumara. These are people from the 60s. They are cult figures in Japan.
Has this work found an audience in Japan as well, or have you been?
Yeah, like in like some copies have been they're like sold at alternative manga bookshops. Like there are bookshops that only keep alternative manga. So
Right.
there are specialist bookshops that have only those kind. So in those spaces, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, so one of my most favorite graphic novels that has come out recently has been Alcazar, which is the story written by actually written in tandem with an Indian, but by a French artist called Simon Lamouret.
Yeah.
And it is basically a graphic novel. Nahi dekhi ho, to please look for it. It is gorgeous beyond belief. It is set on a construction site in Bangalore,
Yeah.
where an actual building called Alcazar is gone up. So extremely beautiful work. And I want to ask you that as a publisher, what is the kind of thing that you're looking for in a list? Which type of books do you want to back with Comics India? What is going on with that aspect of your personality?
Well, I'm trying to, as a publisher, I want to make a magazine. Like, and I believe very strongly, and I say it everywhere in every forum, that unless we have regular monthly periodicals, comics magazines that feature stories like in anthology form as a series, continuing stories, that's the only space where comics can actually breathe. And
Is that partly a financial reason? Because that comes to a very important point. In India, it is very, very difficult to live as a person that practices comics. And I think one of the ways
which
that
is why I do so many things.
exactly. So that I wanted to ask you about which of this fuels your samsaric existence. But
As
equally, one unique phenomenon that has appeared in India with people that practice comics is that they have worked in collectives, they have done anthologies, they have done this kind of work, and now an increasing number are becoming Instagram storytellers who counter the fact that mar jayenge bhaiya if you're trying to pay the bills of a house doing comics, and yet they continue to do it while doing other gigs on the side. So, how have your identities as author, animator, filmmaker funded your activities as a publisher and creator of comics?
this, I mean, I discovered very quickly that actually to publish a black and white anthology is not that expensive. You know?
Are people buying it though?
Yeah, I mean, it gets sold. So we are like at no profit, no loss kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, we don't make money on it, but it funds itself. So as far as that goes, at least the whole point of it was to get books out. There's some issue with the.
Yeah, there's a battery low situation, and I want to really show Annie's photos soon.
Acha.
हो सकता है इसका? हाँ.
Huh?
No, you don't have to stop talking.
I can go on. So yeah, what were you saying? I mean,
So, how these various identities have funded your work, and what happens next? Are you going to make a book of your own still?
yeah. Well, I'm really, I'm a comics author, so I want to draw more comics. I mean, that was what started
No,
everything.
but are you working on something that
Yes.
you'd like to share right now?
Yeah. I'm working on a long form biography of Gandhi, uh, and also adapting Gandhi's book Hind Swaraj into like a 50-page
Is
comic.
it going to be in true Japanese style, running into 2,000 pages in a serialized fashion?
Not really, but at least well, the Gandhi book should be 300 pages at least. I mean, since
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm moving to the last person that we have here on our panel who has waited a long time to say all that he has to. Thank you, Annie.
I have very little to say.
So, Anirudh Sengupta is an aeronautical engineer turned editor of comics anthologies. And he runs a quiz which is extremely popular in Goa, which goes by the name of Sexy, SEQC. Thank you very much. So basically, he is a multi-talented man who is also organized beyond belief. It's the kind of creative person that I can really one gives us heart to, that brings together both sides of the brain in a very beautiful fashion. So, Comic Sense is a periodical that is funded by
Ektara,
Ektara.
one of whom is sitting in our audience right now.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
And basically, it has been an effort which Annie has been doing with a team of people, including his talented brother Orijit Sen, who many of you know as possibly the first person to have done a full length graphic novel in India, River Stories, and a crew of young people. And he has also been pulling off the mammoth task of getting together writing and artistic talent from all over the country for each issue. And as somebody who did that for 2.5 years and great completely and lost her mind completely, I can vouch for the fact that it's not an easy job, right? So I commend you for the task of getting this done over and over.
Yeah.
Just a couple of questions before we wrap
Sure.
the event because I don't want to start causing a half-hour delay for somebody else coming next. What is it that Comic Sans hopes to achieve?
I suppose the thing is, kids stuff tends to be very stilted in many ways. It's very sanitized. It shows them a side of the world that is not really uh, real in a sense. And once you kind of grow up, you suddenly realize this wasn't what I thought. And so the idea behind Comic Sense is mainly to sort of really put good minds and sort of make their life miserable, that kind of thing, not just tell them some nice things about the world. So basically, it's meant to give them a more realistic view of the world. So we're trying to do our comics in such a way that they understand stuff with nuance and stuff with depth rather than just very superficial
No,
things.
so this actually segues very well into a concern that we used to face all the time, which is that you have something to say. You know that ये बहुत valuable है, नन्हे मुन्ने बच्चे should basically be learning all these facts and all these information.
Yeah.
How do you keep from being a pedantic thing which parents approve of, but nobody really wants to read, although they've been thrust three copies in their hands? Like, how do you avoid the trap of being unreadable to young people?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly, I think that's the biggest challenge. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the way we do it is working with people who have open minds. First of all, Iqtar is amazing. I mean, you rarely come across an organization that's willing to uh, fund something and completely let it be as open as you want it to be. I mean, that's a very rare thing, and it's amazing to work with them. The second thing is the kind of people we work with. I mean, all the we have a bank of about 100 people right now, approximately equally divided between artists and writers. And it's great to see the kind of stuff, the stories they want to tell. I think part of it is this, that I mean, in comic sense, there is the freedom to tell those stories. Most people are a little wary of getting into some of those kind of stories.
Yeah.
But in comic sense, we encourage people to tell stories you wouldn't find anywhere else. So there is that also.
And is there some kind of curriculum design to it?
Not at all, not at all. Extracurricular as far as possible.
Good for us all, yeah. I wish people give me more of that. Given the current political and social climate, what is the reaction? So तुम कर रहे हो कि कर रहे हो, but what is the reaction to the magazine's pushing boundaries from whichever end of whichever aspect of society?
Right. Yeah, yeah. So the thing is, we've had quite a few so it goes to Iktara is part of a group called the Takshila Educational Trust, which runs schools. And so this is part of a parcel of magazines that they give to all the students in their schools. That's like 4,000, 5,000 students who get this, apart from the ones that are not in their schools. So obviously, parents tend to be very,
They can be very vigilante.
yeah, absolutely. And so any small thing, we usually, again, through Shraddha, who's part of Ektara, we get feedback. Oh, why is that girl's butt showing? It's like that whole thing with Yash Raj Mukherjee. I can see his bum, that things like that. Little things like that will come up and they'll say, okay, why have we done this? I'm talking to parents.
Then also with a visual medium that becomes 300% more important because words may not say something, but some artist does something which inadvertently just causes
Yes.
a storm.
Absolutely. In fact, the
Yeah.
story I'm talking about was on menstruation. So it's basically talking about those issues. But because, and the artist has done it very, very sort of beautifully. But it's just that, okay, there's a girl there who doesn't have clothes on, and how can you do that? And lots of stuff like that happen. And of course, we are also quite political in our stories. So, the issue, there's a crime and punishment issue in which we had Arun Ferreira, who's a UAP accused, who's been in jail. He's written the story, and he's written a great story on POXO, the effect of POXO. How it works. And that story came out of experiences he had with a young person while he was in jail. That person basically was accused because of caste issues and all, and put in jail. And POXO makes it very easy to target people also, just like most laws nowadays. So, getting those kind of stories in is also important, and we want to tell kids those stories. So, yeah, so we do that, and it does mean that there is a good bit of feedback. So, but we've had the kids are always very excited. It's usually the teachers and the parents who we have trouble with.
We have run out of time for a session which was full of absolutely magnificent people. I have a suggestion. How about you have the Q&A once we leave the stage? That will be the most heart-filling Q&A जहाँ पे कोई डंडा नहीं मार रहा है कहीं से. So basically, there is that. Anirudh, one thing that you and I need to talk about is how you get 100 artists to deliver anything on time. But that will be a separate thing that we'll talk about later. Thank you, all of you, for your attention. It was a long session, a long wait. Thank you for sharing things that we are all deeply interested in, and hopefully they strike a chord with you all also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amrita ji, for taking the session so beautifully. And panel also, we are so grateful. हाँ, फोटोग्राफ के लिए सब साथ में आ जाइए. और जब तक ये फोटोग्राफ हो रही है, मैं आपको बताऊं कि दास्तान महाभारत जो साथ में मेघदूत हॉल है हमारा, उसमें ये चल रहा है. आप लोग प्लीज इसको मिस ना करें. बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट, बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग डिस्कशन चल रहा है.